Washington. That's the plane U-8 Flight 93 that ended up crashing in Pennsylvania. Other developments today, the Afghan Islamic press reporting that Osama bin Laden denying responsibility for attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Vice President Cheney refusing to accept that denial. He says bin Laden remains a prime suspect. The Pakistani government on Monday, and you heard much of this in Wolf's interview with the ambassador to the U.S., that government on Monday will ask Afghans ruling Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden in 3 days or face massive military action led by American forces. U.S. officials do not expect the Taliban to cooperate. I want to go from the latest information to the latest pictures, and those are coming to us from above where the World Trade Center was hit. On Tuesday, we had a chance today to fly with the U.S. Coast Guard and get a look at some aerials that we haven't had a chance to do before. And our Aaron Brown was on board this Coast Guard helicopter as it flew overboard. You're getting a look of the rubble and the debris and the rescue operations that still continue. Very close to there is my colleague Bill Hemmer. Bill, let's bring you in. And I don't know if with the sun and the monitor that you have, if you're able to see these same images, but given what you've been able to see from the ground, your thoughts, and now that you get to see it from the air?
You know, Darren, to be quite frank with you, we try our best in television to show viewers indeed what's taking place. But after seeing it on television for a couple of days and coming to New York, I don't think our viewers really have been able to understand the enormity of this operation here. We're on Greenwich Street here, just about 2.5 blocks from 7 World Trade Center. That's the building in the foreground behind us. It's a 47-story building, Darren. It's been condensed from what we can see to about 7 or 8 floors, and it is a twisted and smashed and pancake pile of metal and debris, and it is just really an awful sight when you consider what took place here on Tuesday of last week. And you were looking at those pictures from above that were taken a short time ago. Gives you a better perspective of the enormity of it from the air as well, which is a perspective we have not gotten to this point just yet. A couple of tidbits of information here that we're starting to get here through FEMA. FEMA is now saying that they're surveying 5 buildings in the immediate area in there, checking for the possibility of further structural damage. Also getting word from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they're developing a plan right now that will possibly put the project on a fast-forward operation here. In other words, we've been seeing truckloads of debris being removed and taken away here. They're trying to speed up that operation, but right now they're trying to figure out the best way to do that. And the numbers staggering. The mayor here, Rudy Giuliani, came out about 3 hours ago and upped the missing number. We were below 5,000 before, now we're above 5,000 at 5,097. It is an astonishing story, Darren, that we consider to see playing out again today. One other note here, we're seeing quite a few of onlookers come down. Some of the streets and the rules here have been relaxed a little bit today. Hundreds of people have come down to get their own view of what we're seeing behind us. And quickly, these masts right here went out about 3 hours ago. We were told that there would be an implosion, a controlled implosion in the rubble behind us that hasn't taken place just yet. And they were warning us in case there were any toxic fumes in the area. They passed out these paper and cloth masks just so that everyone in the area was indeed safe. Darren?
Bill, I want to focus our attention. When we look at those aerial pictures, it reminds us that there has been so much attention focused on what happened above ground and those tall towers. But I think a lot of people aren't familiar that there's quite a bit that was underground the World Trade Center, at least 6 or 7 levels, including parking, a concourse, subway, a number of things below there. And I think there we have the graphic of what you can see was underneath the towers. Perhaps some hope that people who were in that part of the World Trade Center, maybe that's where the greatest hope that people might still be alive and waiting to be rescued. Anything you can add to that?
Indeed, Darren, hope is the right word. That's what they're talking about. If there are survivors at this time, they believe the greatest possibility is somewhere in this area below the street level. A fire official yesterday described that area almost like an inverted volcano, he said. It was extending almost 7 stories below the street level, and I described a few moments ago what we're seeing above the street. If you can imagine for a moment, below the street, the amount of debris and metal that came crashing down below there. He says it's 7 stories going below, and at this point, clearly, we can only imagine the amount of crushing debris that went down that way on Tuesday when 110 stories came crashing down in 2 separate buildings.
Bill Hemmer in Manhattan. Bill, thank you very much. Also a reminder, we have focused so much on the East Coast, on Washington, D.C., and on New York City, but But remember, those 4 flights that were hijacked were all headed to the West Coast, so a big impact being felt there as well, including 3 of the flights which were headed to Los Angeles. I want to show you pictures we're getting now from Los Angeles, from Westwood Community Methodist Church. This is a service that's taking place right now. Dr. Sharon Rhodes Wickett is addressing this week's tragedy in the sermon. In attendance, Warren Christopher, former Secretary of State to the United States. We continue to bring you the pictures of America as it mourns and as it recovers and goes on. And on that note, back up to Wolf in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much, Darren. And was the United States intelligence community caught off guard during Tuesday's attack? For answers, we turn to 3 distinguished guests. The former CIA Director James Woolsey, the chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism, Ambassador Paul Bremer, and retired U.S. General William Odom, a former director of the National Security Agency. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. General Odom, I'll ask you that question. Was the U.S. intelligence community caught by surprise?
Clearly. I think people call this attack the biggest event since Pearl Harbor, the biggest attack on the U.S., surprise attack. The intelligence community was completely caught off guard then, and the CIA and the intelligence community was created by the 1947 National Security Act to prevent future such surprises, which raises real questions about what's happened in the last 50 years.
Why do you believe the U.S. intelligence community was caught so completely off guard, by surprise, by Tuesday's attack?
Well, I would cite, there are many factors, but I would cite a couple as being the main ones. Over the past 10, 15 years, we've had a lot more publicity about our intelligence, a lot more leaks about what it can do, and people like bin Laden and other terrorist incidents have learned a great deal about how to evade it. The technical side of the intelligence community has faced a modernization in communications that it has to keep up with, and it may not have kept up with that as well as it should.
What's your take on that, Ambassador Bremer?
Well, I think it's certainly a failure. I think it's a long-term and a short-term problem. We really have done a lot of damage to our intelligence services starting in the mid-'70s with the Church Committee hearings and a progressive downgrading of human intelligence in favor of technical intelligence. And you can't get good intelligence against terrorists, really good intelligence, without having spies and terrorist groups. And the more recent problem was that the previous administration put into effect some guidelines which restricted the ability of CIA agents to go after these kinds of very high value, very difficult targets, no question, these terrorist spies.
And so the bottom line is that the U.S. simply was not prepared.
Well, as the general says, if you have 5,000 people killed, there's obviously been a major failure.
You agree?
Surely. We were basically spying with one arm tied behind our back. These restrictive limitations on not being able to recruit people who have some violence in their past as spies were ridiculous, and I hope those are going to be junked within days if they haven't been already. Also, we have had budget cuts. I mean, the CIA and American intelligence actually did a pretty good job at Y2K. They had money put into the budget in '98 and '99. People were worried about terrorist incidents at Y2K. In the morning of January 1st, 2000, the budgeteers in both the executive branch and the Congress dusted off their hands and said, well, terrorism is solved, no more problem there, let's cut the budget back. So, and the other thing people need to realize is that a number of these people who executed this terrible attack have been in the country, some of them for 7 or 8 years. American intelligence has absolutely nothing to do with spying on people in this country. It's a law enforcement matter if you have some sort of probable cause that a crime is being committed. So then we said on the Terrorism Commission that I served on, that Jerry chaired, that there are also some restrictions that on the FBI's ability to investigate terrorist groups in this country that I think you could not do away with, but you could loosen up some and still be well within the framework of the Constitution.
General Odom, I see you want to jump in.
Particularly when you get the FBI here. Our counterintelligence, which plays a considerable role here, is very fragmented. There is no place in the United States government where a comprehensive counterintelligence picture can be gotten. There's a lot of parochial turf boundary fights between the FBI, CIA, and the military services. It is my experience that when you mix criminal investigation and law enforcement with counterintelligence, you get very lousy counterintelligence. It's a different set of skills. And I think now is the time to do something that, for political parochial reasons, we haven't been able to do. I think the FBI should be taken out of the counterintelligence business, left to law enforcement. We need a national counterintelligence service under the DCI with direct operational control over the 3 military services counterintelligence and the CIA's.
That raises enormous alarm bells for a lot of civil libertarians, doesn't it?
I don't think it does. If you think it through, I don't think it has to. No, even I think it would be less than the case of the FBI.
Whatever the solution, it's clear that the United States government operates under in effect, a sort of a phony distinction between domestic and international terrorism. And people have warned, including our commission that Director Woolsey and I sat on, we've warned for a long time that this is a distinction that the terrorists don't keep. It's one that we keep for bureaucratic reasons, but it's not one that terrorists keep.
And just to explain it to our viewers out there, the CIA operates outside of the United States. The FBI operates inside the United States.
And it's clear that you need to have a more seamless interaction of the intelligence that is collected, however it's collected under whatever guidelines there are, and we need better capacity to analyze that. We don't have enough analysts. We don't have enough linguists to deal with this tremendous flow of information we're getting. All of this has been pointed out not only by our commission but by others.
As an illustration of what both Jerry and Bill said, according to the New York Times this morning, CIA picked up some interaction overseas between 2 of the people who conducted the terrorist operation and some associates of bin Laden. A couple of weeks ago, passed the information on. In one way or another, it wound its way through the Immigration Service to the FBI, and no one was able to catch up with things on time. It just took, they got into inboxes and outboxes, inboxes and outboxes.
But let me, well, we've been hearing for the last couple of years that the cooperation between the FBI and the CIA has never been better.
It's getting better.
It's cosmetic at the top organizationally. And if you reorganize, if you got the intelligence community into good shape, you would still face a very serious difficulty that I faced at NSA. When you have good intelligence about something that's going to cross the border, to whom you disseminate it? To the Customs Service, which is in Treasury, to INS, which is in Justice, to the Coast Guard, and to the FAA, which is in the Transportation Department, to the FBI, which is in Justice and doesn't like to belong to anybody. Right now, it is so fragmented that if you have the intelligence, if you wanted to give it to somebody who could use it effectively and make sure that everybody knows what he's doing, you don't have that. And I think you're going to have a cabinet-level border control organization created which amalgamates these people.
Well, I thought when you were the Director of Central Intelligence, you were in charge of all of the intelligence organizations, including the NSA.
Well, the DCI is sort of the chairman of the board of the whole foreign intelligence community, and he's CEO of the CIA, but he has only basically a handshake relationship with the FBI or any of these other agencies that Bill was talking about. And there's another issue here, which is that you find things where you're looking. And after the first year and a half of the World Trade Center investigation, the Clinton administration and the Justice Department veered away from looking at state-sponsored terrorism and went over to looking for loose networks and bin Laden and the rest. And they may have missed some things here because they weren't looking for what was going on with some of the states that sponsor terrorism, such as Iraq.
And so what you're saying is that for political reasons, they didn't really want to know what happened?
Well, I don't want to make that charge, but I would say I think the Clinton administration was particularly feckless and flaccid in dealing with Iraq, and I don't think they really liked confrontations. I don't think they intentionally looked away from evidence. But I do think that the word kind of suffused the executive branch that, you know, this is all sort of loose associations here, and it wasn't really convenient to look for state sponsorship. It certainly was not a focus, and you find things where you're focused.
You know, I think what Jim has just been saying about this focus and what happened to the Clinton administration is right on, but you can't. And I think they're really seriously to blame for a lot of this, but it goes back further than that. You can push it way back to the Iran war, the collapse of the regime in Iran, but you can bring it on through the 80s. After the Gulf War, we celebrated. We hadn't won the Gulf War. We just had a truce. If we'd gone all the way to Baghdad, you could say we're closer to some sort of victory. But we've been at war with the radical Arabs in general, and Iraq in particular, ever since. We just haven't taken that seriously. And when the Clinton administration fires off cruise missiles to make us feel good and them feel good at Sudan and Afghanistan, this makes it worse. This doesn't do anything to destroy terrorist capabilities.
Ambassador Bremer, let's pick up a point that Director Woolsey made, a very serious allegation that after the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and the arrest of Ramzi Yousef, who is now serving a life sentence plus 200 or so years in a federal prison in Colorado, that the then administration, the Clinton administration, just sort of said, well, it was Ramzi Yousef, without looking at what some have suggested were his bosses. As you know, Laurie Milroy has suggested that he was an agent of the Iraqi government. Right. But that would be politically awkward to have to acknowledge that.
Well, I don't have any evidence one way or the other than what I've read. It seems to me that part of what we have to do now as we focus forward on responding to this particular attack is be sure that we don't just think that if we can get at bin Laden or get at Afghanistan, we've solved the problem. That's not, that is a symbol of the problem, but it's not the problem. We have to do what we have to do in Afghanistan and again Osama. That's the first thing that has to happen. It has to happen well. But beyond that, we've got to then build out and go after other states which support terrorism, go after cells. Bin Laden is operating in 40 different countries, including obviously the United States. We have to go to our allies and say, your ambiguity towards states like Syria and Iran and Iraq has got to stop. We got to stop seeing French and Italian businessmen getting off airplanes in Baghdad and signing contracts, and the same thing in Tehran. We have to get a new international consensus against terrorism. That's the job that now lies before our country. It's a job that is going to take years now. It's not a job of months. Even the military part of it, the first inner core without which you can't move, is going to take a very long time, as the President made clear yesterday in his radio address.
Director Woolsey, we've spoken about this before, so I know how you feel, but just to review, you're increasingly coming around to the conclusion that the first World Trade Center bombing, which Ramzi Yousef was the mastermind of, that he perhaps was an agent of the Iraqi government, and if in fact he was, what does that say about this current terrorist attack?
I think that it's a testable hypothesis whether he was an agent of Iraq or not. I think they can go back into some of the evidence in the first World Trade Center bombing, including some of the materials that are now in the hands of the British government, and see whether or not Yousef was in fact an Iraqi asset. If he was, that doesn't mean that Saddam was the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain that pulled all the levers for what happened on September 11th. But I think it would make people think a lot harder about the possibility that foreign states' intelligence services, such as Iraq and possibly Iran and Syria and others, but Iraq would come first to mind for me, were involved. Because a lot of this looks to me as if it's not something that a fellow sitting out in the middle of Afghanistan is going to be able to orchestrate by himself, even if he has several $100 million.
General Odom, you agree?
I think the point he made about his last point is absolutely critical. To think that this operation took place purely on the basis of assets and capabilities of a non-governmental organization is not very credible with me. The intelligence support for this operation pretty clearly had to depend on some country like Iraq, Syria, Libya, who knows how many people are involved. I think the clearer intelligence picture you have of what we're up against, the more disturbed we're going to be about who our enemies are. And I think you'll find some states with very good relations with the U.S. that you will feel very ambivalent about. And it's not clear what the policy implications of this will be.
Ambassador Bremer, if you look at a range of terrorist threats now facing the United States in the aftermath of Tuesday's attacks, what are the most serious threats?
Well, the most obvious and serious one is that we haven't rolled up the entire operation that was here in the United States. We know from the press reports, at least, that the FBI believes there are some pilots missing who may have been involved in this. It's quite obvious, with more arrests again announced today, that this was a very broad operation involving dozens of people, if not hundreds of people, many of them in the United States and many of them here long term. So the most immediate threat is that we haven't seen that the other shoe is going to drop from this group. Then there's always a threat, as there always is with terrorism, of copycat operations, people who are not necessarily involved here but who think, gee, that was a great idea, I'm going to try it. And if there is a state behind this, of course, then we don't know what could be next. It could be almost anything. And of course, in counterterrorism, as in war, we usually prepare for the last battle and the last war. I mean, bin Laden moved from attacking embassies to attacking a frigate, which we never thought was going to happen, to now attacking commercial airliners, which people hadn't anticipated. And we keep closing the barn door each time after the horse is gone. I don't know what the next one is. We got to do those things. We got to fix the aircraft security, but who knows what's next?
Director Woolsey?
I think Jerry's right, and I think that it is just essential that we go back over these past terrorist events and look carefully at all the evidence to see where the strands of proof lead. We haven't done that yet. The Bush administration is not the one that made these mistakes. If they were made, it can have a fresh start, it can have a fresh look, and it really should.
How worried, General Odom, this will be the last word, how worried should the American public be right now?
Well, I think you should be worried about the things that Ambassador Bremer mentioned. Those were the first one that come to my mind. But I don't think the American public ought to wring its hands and become excessively frightened. I am really impressed with what I see of the American public's reaction to this. There's anger, but they're really quite cool. They're really quite serious about it. I think you've had, I think that probably the political elites have been shocked at the maturity of the public's reaction.
One further point. There have been some incidents in which Muslims and people with dark skin around the country who look like they're from the Mideast have been set upon. One person was killed. People have been beaten up. Americans really need to understand our war is not with our friends from the Mideast. It is not with the Muslim world. Islam is a wonderful religion. These people who did this bear the same relationship to Islam that Torquemada and the people who ran the Spanish Inquisition bear to the rest of Christianity. They are not typical of Islam, and our fight is not with one of the world's great religions, and it's not with the Arab people.
Last three military operations we performed, the Gulf War, Bosnia, and Kosovo, were in support of Muslim peoples. So the U.S. ought to emphasize this fact that we are not biased against Muslims.
Okay, General Odom, Director Woolsey, Ambassador Bremer, three of the best in the business. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani has been widely praised for his calm demeanor and quick action after Tuesday's attack on the World Trade Center. Earlier today, I spoke with Mayor Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us today. And first of all, on behalf of everyone here at CNN and, of course, people all over the world, our deepest condolences to you and all your fellow New Yorkers on this horrible moment in your city's history. Begin, please, by updating us on the progress in the search and rescue operation.
Well, the progress in removing the debris and the structural damage has been actually monumental. I flew over the site yesterday, and it's very different than it was even the day before. We've removed over 20,000 tons of debris. About 1,200 trucks have gone through, and so that the site is more controllable now from the point of view of relief and rescue efforts. I wish I could report more progress in saving people, which, except for the first day, we have not had progress. We haven't given up hope yet. And the experts tell us that there still is some hope that we could find people. But, you know, we would be, I think, all much happier if we were finding and saving more human beings. My firefighters and police officers and the people that Governor Pataki has given us from the state and the federal people, they're all there. Getting rid of the debris and the rubble is part of it, but the thing that's really driving them is they're hoping to be able to find survivors, and they haven't had any success in the last couple of days.
What do you need most, Mr. Mayor, right now? Do you need more volunteers to come to New York City and help in this operation?
We actually don't. The showing of support and the volunteers that have come here, and even those that have come here and actually there's nothing for them to do right now, has been wonderful for the spirit of the city. It's kind of like we're all embracing each other. America is embracing each other, and that show of support is enormously important. But right now, it's more targeted expertise that we need as opposed to large numbers of people. And the very best thing for people to do, rather than to just volunteer, is to make donations to charities that are obviously legitimate charities if they want. And then if called upon, either by the city, the state, or the federal government to help, well, then obviously we need their help. We have help from the state of New York and Governor Pataki. We have help from President Bush. And volunteer help would actually not be very useful right now, although the emotion and the spirit of it has been enormous in sustaining the people of the city.
People all over the world, Mr. Mayor, are watching. When you say you need help in what you'd call targeted expertise, what does that mean? Because people around the world want to help if they can.
Relief and recovery right now. In other words, moving out the debris, the rubble, the contractors who are helping us, the construction workers who are helping us, who are experts in being able to deal with disaster sites. Once that is over with, then we're going to move to the phase of reconstructing that area. We have to make plans with the governor, with the people in the city about exactly what we want to do there, but we're going to need a lot of help then. And I also, we obviously need financial help, and we got a great boost with what President Bush did on Friday and the United States Congress did on Friday in putting aside $20 billion for relief and recovery in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington. But the recovery effort is going to cost a lot more than that in order to rebuild that area to what it was. And I should emphasize that this is not just for New York City. The area that we're talking about, the area that's affected, is the financial capital of the United States and the world. Its direction, its future success, has a lot to do with the success of the American economy. So when people think about investing and helping in that area, whatever part of America they come from, it's going to have an impact on their economy as to how successfully it's rebuilt. There we need the help of the United States Congress.
I was going to say, do you think it's a good idea? There's been a lot of talk in New York, elsewhere, about rebuilding the World Trade Center Twin Towers. Is that a good idea?
I think that is worth a lot of consideration. In other words, the exact plans for this area should be given a great deal of thought, as opposed to just jumping immediately in the emotion of what we're feeling right now on a plan that we're going to seize on. And I'm going to work with Governor Pataki to put together a group of people who, over the course of the next month or so, can be done quickly, but not right at this minute, to come up with a plan for what the future of that area should be. A lot of people should be consulted, the city leaders, the state leaders, the families of the people affected. I think we have to listen to them also as to what they're going to need. So that's a very, very worthwhile consideration. But I would caution people not to make an immediate decision. There's too much emotion right now, and it's worth a great deal of thought.
How worried should New Yorkers be right now about their safety, especially when they go to other striking landmarks in New York, like the Empire State Building or the Statue of Liberty? How worried should they be?
Well, whether you tell people to be worried or not, some people are going to be worried and some people aren't going to be worried. But I've tried to think about the best example or analogy we can have to what we're going through. And this isn't a perfect one, but I think it works. The people of Britain and the people of London went through this during the Battle of Britain. And in fact, it was even different in the sense that they were being bombed every day. And what they did was they took precautions, they were careful, they had bomb shelters, they had hospitals, but they went about their lives and they didn't let the Nazi assault stop their way of life. And we're not under consistent bombardment in any way. We've had a tremendous attack, worse actually than any single attack during the Battle of Britain. But there's that fear. There's that fear that something like that could happen again. It should not stop us from going about our way of life. That's what they want to do. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make us fearful. And I think that most New Yorkers will. I've traveled around the city last night, and people were in restaurants, people went to plays, people were eating outside. And here's a way you can help us. Come to New York, go to a play, right? Go to a Yankee or Met game, come and spend some money here. And that's great. You come here and use New York for all the purposes that New York is the capital of the world, and show these cowardly terrorists they can't stop us.
The trading on the Wall Street markets are going to resume tomorrow. Any special problems that you can envisage?
Well, getting the stock market open for tomorrow and the mercantile exchange open for tomorrow is an example of how we can rebuild and rebuild very, very quickly. And it was a very difficult task, We're very hopeful that it's going to work really well and then continue. But it's important to get the stock exchange open, and it's important to get the mercantile exchange open, because it has a big impact on the American economy. And I would just unabashedly say to people, show confidence. Show confidence in the fact that we have the strongest economy in the world. We've got the system that's going to prevail, the financial, economic system and political system that is the wave of the future despite this barbaric attack, and show confidence.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to wind up by reading one line from an editorial that was in the Los Angeles Times across the country on Friday. It said this: when was the last time you caught yourself praying for New Yorkers or congratulating them, as we do here and now? I think I speak for all of us when I say the Los Angeles Times got it just right. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck to you.
And
go ahead.
And we pray for America. That's what we all do. We're all in this together, and we're all Americans, and we pray for our country, and we know it's going to prevail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And around the country today, Sunday, people have been attending services here in Los Angeles. We're looking at some live pictures now, for example. This scene that we're seeing in these pictures in Los Angeles, of course, similar to church services around the country. During this difficult time, many people, including world leaders, survivors, families, are turning to prayer for comfort. And at this moment, I'd like to pause and listen to some of the events happening in the United States today.
Our words, our deeds, and in the giving of our gifts. At this time of offering our gifts, our tithes, let us indeed be most merciful.
I'm sure a lot of you have probably noticed that there's been a lot of stuff going on this week. And so I'm going to recommend to all of you, when you get back, your mom and dad need you right now. And so when you get back to your mom and dad this morning, I want you to give them a big old hug and hold on to them and tell them you love them. And I bet they're going to do the same thing for you.
Yes, as difficult as it is, Jesus' command to forgive and to love our enemies calls us to eventually move beyond all of our mixed and tangled feelings toward that healing and wholeness which only God's justice and God's love can bring.
Question, I think, for every person today, and I'm sure everybody, it went through your mind. What if I'd been on that airplane with just a few minutes of life? What if I'd been sitting in one of those towers and looked up and saw that plane coming into my office building?
This is a dark day in America, but there has to be something that can sustain us. There has to be something that can hold us. There has to be something that can fortify us. There has to be something that can encourage us as we face these dark days.
Millions of people praying today on this day, this first Sunday after the disaster last Tuesday. Here to discuss the power of prayer, religion, and family are two guests. Bill Bennett is a co-director of Empower America. And from our Boston Bureau, Rabbi Harold Kushner. He's the author of When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Before we get started, just want to point out we had hoped that the very Reverend Nathan Baxter from the Washington National Cathedral would be with us as well, but unfortunately he was not able to make it this afternoon. And Rabbi Kushner, let's begin with the very title of your book that so many of us read many years ago, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. In that book, you write this: why then do bad things happen to good people? One reason is that our being human leaves us free to hurt each other, and God can't stop us without taking away the freedom that makes us human. A lot of people are asking that question right now when they see what has happened. Your thoughts on these tumultuous events?
Well, the first thing, Wolf, would be that the theology really has to wait until the grieving and the bleeding has stopped. That the first thing you ask in a case like this is not why does God let it happen, but how can I help people to whom it happened? When you have done that, when we observed, as we've just about finished, the 7-day memorial period, which is psychologically useful, then you ask, where was God in all this? And my answer is that God didn't want this to happen. God grieves with us. God inspires firefighters and rescuers to risk their lives. God motivates people to give blood, to give money, to do whatever they can to help people. This is where I find God, not in the accident, but in the incredible resilience of the human community to surmount the accident and to insist that life is worth living even in a precarious world.
Bill Bennett, I'll ask you a question that a lot of people around the country are asking. How can a compassionate God allow this kind of tragedy to occur?
Well, I would agree with Rabbi Kushner. I think a brief theological moratorium on theology is probably a good idea. We've had some quick and glib theological judgments from a few over the last few days, which I think have not been helpful. I think Billy Graham answered that question at the National Cathedral, Wolf. He said, we don't know. We don't know why. But we do know that God has given us freedom. And in Christianity, we believe man has fallen. And that means with freedom, man can rise to tremendous heights of dignity and honor. He can also sink by his own hand to the worst depths. That's what I've been saying all week, that we at least have had a moment of moral clarity. We now understand that a lot of the seemingly or so-called learned discussions of the last 30 years in which people have said in our universities and elsewhere, well, maybe there isn't such a thing as good and evil or right and wrong, it's all contextual, it all depends on where you sit, are really bunk. We saw good and evil this week. We saw the face of evil. We saw the hand of evil. So I hope that moment of moral clarity is preserved and extended.
Rabbi Kushner, what do good people do now in dealing with this evil?
The first thing you do is just hang together the way we just saw people gathering in churches, people gathering in their synagogues for Rosh Hashanah in a couple of days, knowing that you're not alone, that you're part of a large extended family of people grieving, hoping for better. The second thing I think we really have to be careful of is, as somebody put it, be very careful whom you choose as an enemy, for you may become like him. God forbid that in our efforts to do something because we feel so helpless and powerless, we forget the values that make us Americans. I think what good people do now is support the government and support their neighbors, look for the United States government to punish the perpetrators, but not look for revenge and not look for wanting to hurt somebody, hit somebody, kill somebody, just to make us feel less helpless.
Bill Bennett, you know there's an urge out there for revenge in the American public.
I think revenge is deserved. I don't know if I disagree with the rabbi or not, but I think vengeance is correct in this situation. I know vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, but in World War II, he used Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Greatest Generation and Churchill and others to gain that vengeance. Revenge, punishment for what has happened is, I think, exactly appropriate. No, we do not want to become what these perpetrators of evil are. I don't think we will. I think it would be very hard for Americans to do that. But we fight. We pray and we fight, and it is right to fight. There's no theological or moral set of principles that I know of that have any respectability that argue that we cannot fight and that we cannot punish those who have done this great evil to us. Great evil and damage have been inflicted on us. And I think as we heard those beautiful sounds of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and we heard it from the National Cathedral on Thursday. There's a great line, there are a lot of great lines in that song, and one of them is, loose the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. I trust the United States, I trust the leaders of the United States, I trust the people of the United States. I think we will do the right thing, but to do the right thing here requires us to do something strong and direct and straightforward.
Rabbi Kushner, what's wrong with revenge right now?
I've got to clarify the distinction between punishment and revenge. Punishment is finding people who deserve to be hurt for what they did to hurt others. Revenge is taking pleasure in hurting somebody because you're feeling helpless and you can't handle feeling helpless. Revenge is really more about control. It's more about exercising power, and it's less about justice. What we did in World War II, which I totally endorse, was punishment for people who deserve to be punished. It was not revenge against anybody who happened to come along as a target. I hope we will come down very hard on the people behind this and everyone who supported them, but I hope we will never permit ourselves to be carried away in the direction of hating, hurting innocent Muslims, Arab Americans who share our values, not the values of the terrorists.
Bill Bennett, in your book, The Book of Virtues, a bestseller, another book that I read, you write this, and let's put it up on the screen. We need wisdom, often the wisdom of a wise leader, to give our courage determinate form, to give it intelligent direction. Is the United States getting that leadership right now?
Sure it is. I think you saw it today with the array of guests you had on earlier. I think you're also seeing it from the President. You saw it from the Secretary of State, a stunning interview by the Vice President of the United States this morning. I think George Bush's words as the week went on got better and better, got stronger and stronger. He spoke more and more from his own heart and his own convictions. His visit to New York. Local leaders, Mayor Giuliani has distinguished himself. You bet we have leadership. I now think again we have clarity, Wolf, about things like intelligence and the proper use of intelligence and how we have trashed our intelligence agencies in the past, and now they need to be rebuilt.
Rabbi Kushner, the latest CNN USA Today Gallup poll just out today shows that the American public thinks President Bush is doing a very good job. 86% approve of the way he's handling this crisis, only 10% disapprove. What do you look for? What should the American people look for in their leaders right now?
You know, Wolf, one of the miracles of American history is that when we have needed strong leadership, we have found strong leadership. No one could have predicted that Abraham Lincoln would become the president he was. No one could have predicted that Franklin Roosevelt would have become the leader he was. And I hope we will be as blessed in this particular crisis. I think what we need is, as Mr. Bennett said, a leader who will inspire, who will make people ready to follow him, a leader who will make us prepared and willing to make sacrifices if necessary, sacrificing our lives in the ultimate sacrifice, sacrificing our comfort, our material goods. But perhaps more than anything else, we will require a leader who has the wisdom to know when not to listen to the public clamoring for military action and violence, when to act strongly and when to withhold the terrible swift sword. And I pray we'll have it.
You know, Bill Bennett, I want to pick up on that point. There was immediate pressure on President Bush to respond swiftly, militarily. Even some of his advisors, even there's a report the president wanted to do something, but people held him back and said, let's do this the right way.
I imagine he held himself back, too. By the way, I don't get the sense that the American people are acting like a mob right now, screaming for anybody's head. I think they're remarkably upset and remarkably cool. Such have been the people I've talked to. Shakespeare says, some are born great, some achieve greatness, some have greatness thrust upon them. And it may be that this is the situation with President Bush, and I think he has responded very, very well. There's another aspect about democracy, though, and leadership. It's not just for our leaders to lead. It's for the citizenry to lead. And I'm thinking here about those citizen leaders on that airplane. Everybody's making a great deal, as of course it's news, about this notion that the president gave authority to shoot down commercial airliners if they were heading toward the White House or someplace. A couple of citizens made that decision, essentially, morally the same decision, when they decided to take that pilot or try to take that plane down so that it would not do further damage. We are calling on our leaders to do a lot, but such times call on us. We call on ourselves to do a lot as well. And one thing in our minds, I think, as we think about the years to come, is Mr. Glick and Mr. Burnett and the others on that flight that went down in Pennsylvania. The kind of courage and citizenship that they showed is just as important a part of the strength of America.
Stand by, gentlemen. I want to listen to Governor Pataki speaking now live in New York. Let's take a break and listen to him.
That we think back and give thanks for those who are lost and still missing, and those who are confirmed dead. We've seen many different organizations take great pain. Port Authority has also suffered enormously. Their headquarters their offices were in the tower. Their leadership, their police were in the tower. They've done a spectacular job since this disaster. They're still out there at the airports, at the bridges, at the scene, at ground zero, risking their lives because that's what they do. And it's just a very sad day when we have to reflect and have a moment of silence for those who have gone. It's not just 74, that's a number. It's people like Neil Levin, who's done so much for me, not just at the court, as commissioner of 3 agencies before he was so excited about going to head the court. People like Fred Marone, who could have gotten out, but he went back up to find Neil, and now we can't find him. And I've been with his family, with the president, on Friday. We have to just honor them as heroes, thank them for their love of the people of New York, and pray that their families will be strong, and make sure their families know they're a part of us now, and we'll always be there standing with them. And Governor, we stand together. You've been great. Thank you, Governor. We share those losses, but we'll get through this. God bless Neil. God bless Fred. God bless all of them. Port Authority and the United States of America. God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you, Governor.
Thank you.
Governor DeFrancesco.
Let me just add, first, Governor Pataki's done such an outstanding job in his leadership role, working with the mayor and all of the people of New York. Such a tremendous outpouring of strength, really, in this very difficult time. We need many, many heroes. And I know people across the nation are worried about their friends or families or acquaintances who are working in the Port Authority. Did they get out? Are they still missing? Can they still be found? But these Port Authority personnel, particularly the police, were running into the buildings. We're going into the buildings to help people get out. They're real heroes. Neil Levin and his staff just did an outstanding job, as they continue to do today.
Rabbi Kushner, I want to come back to our conversation. It's not every day you see the governor of New York, George Pataki, weeping on television as he discusses what he personally saw and the heroism that he witnessed in dealing with the losses that so many people have suffered. How do you react when you see that?
Well, I think all of us for the last 7 days have been on the verge of tears, mixing the pain, the grief, the outrage. And I think I was also very moved by that, and I think it was good for people around the country to see high-placed officials crying. It gives them permission to vent their own grief, so that nobody has to say, I'm not going to show my feelings because I don't want to scare or upset the children. Let them learn that at a time like this, men cry. Strong men, brave men cry, because Lord knows there is so much to cry about.
Bill Bennett, what do you say to young people, to children who are watching this, who are scared, frightened? How do you deal with this?
I think you, I agree with the rabbi, you tell the truth and you let them see the truth. You first point them to what we just saw. You point them to the heroism of those firefighters and police officers who were going in as people were running for their lives out. These men and women were going in. But I think we tell them the truth. There's been a lot written already this week about how we need to reassure children, and we certainly do need to reassure children. Last night, our family was at a football game at Our Lady of Good Counsel here, right outside Washington. My son John plays on the Georgetown prep team. On his team, a young man made a touchdown, Eric Heidenberger. His aunt, Michelle Heidenberger, was the stewardess on Flight 77. And everybody erupted in a cheer for Eric. And when the folks from the opposite team heard that, who this young man was, who he was related to, they cheered too. There is, in the particular acts we do, a way of reconsecrating our lives, reminding ourselves of what's important, and carrying on in the best kind of way. And I think children to see that honest emotion that Rabbi Kushner was talking about, and to hear the truth. And when they ask us, you know, should we be afraid? Yeah, there are some things to be afraid of. Absolutely. Are we safe? Yes, you're safe. But it is a dangerous world. For the last 10 years, I think we've forgotten that it is a very dangerous world. The other thing, though, I have to tell you, Wolf, about young people, guys we saw last night, and young people I've been talking to this week, a lot of them are scared. A lot of them are ready to do what is asked of them. And we may have another greatest generation in the making, and they may be called upon to make sacrifice.
Rabbi Kushner, what do you tell your members of your congregation? What do you say to them how they should deal with their children on these horrendous issues?
Hug them and keep them close. Tell them how important they are to you. Let them say how important you are to them. Assure them that what happened last Tuesday is very, very rare, and that's why it's been on all the news. Terrible as it is, it's not going to happen all the time, and it's not going to happen because the people who died deserved it. And then just hug them some more and let them feel safe in your arms.
Well, what if they watch the television shows and they watch what's going on, they still don't feel safe in your arms? What do you do then?
Tell them that you're scared too, and tell them that all you can do is live in a world which is sometimes very scary, but that the government, the army, the police, the authorities, and their mothers and fathers are around there to keep them as safe as possible. Sooner or later, children do learn that the world is not fair, and all you can do is tell them that we'll be here to try and protect you as best we can. But what's the alternative? All you can do is go out and live bravely, because the alternative is just unacceptable.
And Bill Bennett, you can wind this up. When you saw Governor Pataki crying on our screens just a few minutes ago, is that a sense of reassurance to the public out there, or is there a sense of alarm that here the governor of New York is crying?
Look, I think in some ways, ironically, we are a better country in a week. We're better because I think the better angels of our nature are coming more to the surface. And there's another leader who's distinguished himself this week. That's all part of the story. There's been a rap on America for the last few years that, you know, it's phony, it's all phony, it's phony emotion. Every time a politician speaks, it's, you know, they're fooling you, they're dissembling. We saw some honest men and women this week speaking honestly and from the heart, from our president on down. And that's a good thing. And by the way, that's a very good thing for children to see.
Bill Bennett, thank you very much. Rabbi Kushner, for Bill Bennett, let me take this opportunity to wish you a Happy New Year as the Rosh Hashanah holiday begins tomorrow night. Thanks to both of you for joining us. And the city of Washington, D.C. has been affected dramatically by the attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. Here now to give us some perspective is CNN's Washington Bureau Chief, Frank Sesno. Frank, your thoughts on what we have all seen?
Well, Wolf, what we've experienced, what we've seen here in the nation's capital is unlike anything most of us have experienced in our lifetimes. Without question, the Capitol's been transformed. Not despair, though, but purpose, as we've heard today. Anxiety, for sure, but mostly it's been determination and remarkable unity. As we've heard over and over again, the destruction in New York was the costliest foreign attack ever on American soil. The strike at the Pentagon, the first time in 189 years since the War of 1812 that Washington has been attacked. Outwardly, the signs of change are obvious. Prayer and vigil, patriotism and pride, recovery now at the Pentagon. Heightened security around government buildings. The tours still run, but they're sparse and different. The Capitol's monuments, icons of American freedom and history, open again, but where flags still convey the mood, and the few visitors search for words.
But there's no doubt in my mind that we'll be stronger and we'll overcome this and be a better nation for this.
I walked around with goosebumps and tears in my eyes. I mean, it's just really, this is America.
And on Washington's inside, where a week ago there was partisan rancor over the budget and education, now it's about homeland defense and defeating the global scourge of terrorism. Now it's about survival. And so, Wolf, in just a matter of days, a $40 billion recovery and relief package passed the Congress, a use of force resolution passed the Congress. A participant describes an urgent scene as those bills were moving through. Aides literally running from one side of the Capitol to the other. This participant says he was reminded of emergency workers, all banding together, Republicans and Democrats alike. On the Hill and at the White House, Wolf, offices flooded by calls from around the country, around the world really, people offering money, clothes, food, computers, furniture, so much so that many of these offices don't even know what to do with them other than to turn them over to other relief organizations. And I spoke to one senator and I asked him, what comes close in your experience to what we've experienced over nearly the past week? And he said really nothing. The closest he said he could come would be the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He was a law student here. He recalls the visions of grief and shock and amazement. But he says even then, Wolf, people didn't feel this vulnerable.
Frank, you and I have been in Washington for a long time. In my experience, I've never experienced what is going through this Capitol right now. Is that the same sense you're getting?
Oh, yeah, and from everybody you talk to, you know, diplomats, political leaders, former administration officials, average citizens, the children, their parents, every place you go in this Capitol. And Bill Bennett made reference to this. You know, we've become hardened to it, even in the media. You know, we've seen people embrace and cry in our newsrooms. Everywhere you go, people have been so accustomed to questioning the motivation of elected leaders, of those of us in the media. But that questioning is now set aside. There's a grander purpose. Journalism is more than journalism, for example, now. There's a civic duty, a public service, if you will, to it. There's a higher calling, and it's palpable in Washington.
And I sense that there's a lot less cynicism right now in this nation's capital.
It's not to say that it won't return. It's not to say that there won't be some times of amazing testing ahead. Right now, it's a call to arms. It's a call for unity and perseverance. Really, that's the easy part. When some of these actions start being taken, when some of the hard choices have to be made, for example, laws change that may call into question, in some minds anyway, whether civil liberties are being eroded in the process, the debate will resume. But for now, the Capitol is prepared for it, and people are engaging this issue and this debate as certainly I've never seen before.
Frank Sesno, our Washington bureau chief and the creator, the host, the original host of Late Edition. Thanks so much for joining us. And as we leave you, Frank, I just want to put up on our screen to show you and our viewers the covers of the three major news magazines. Time magazine has a special issue, One Nation Indivisible. America digs out and digs in, with President Bush in New York City on the cover. Look at Newsweek. Newsweek's special report, After the Terror, God Bless America, with firemen raising the flag amid the rubble, on the cover of Newsweek. And on the cover of U.S. News and World Report, Under Siege, with a battered flag hanging proudly from a street sign. Now Bruce Morton has the last word on preserving our freedom while protecting our security.
The late Eric Severin, during his years as a CBS News analyst, wrote after one terrorist attack about the special strength of the shameless. He meant, of course, that people who are prepared to kill the innocent, who see the killing of children as an act of war, have a strength the rest of us lack. They'll do anything, we won't. That is a feature of the enemy in America's newest war. They are shameless. They will kill anyone, do anything. Most wars are between the armed forces of one country and another, though civilians, of course, usually suffer in the process too. But in this war, civilians are the other side's targets of choice. And the aims of this war are different too. The terrorists are not trying to conquer U.S. territory. Their aim is to demoralize the United States, to make it afraid, make it retreat from the world stage. Osama bin Laden, for instance, would banish Americans and pro-American Arabs from Muslim countries. But there's another aim, to make Americans lose some of their freedoms, lose the openness in which we live.
The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It is to alter behavior. It is to force people who believe in freedom to be less free by altering their behavior and redressing a balance between freedom and security.
Almost certainly, Americans will lose some freedom, more searches, longer delays at airports, an increase perhaps in the number of people stopped and searched in their cars or on the streets, increased use of ethnic profiling, and so on. Most people would probably happily put up with some of this, but sooner or later draw the line. At some point, and different people would set different points, at some point Americans would lose the freedom that makes their country what it is, a place with lots of individual liberty, with a great tolerance for different beliefs. Then we're in trouble. On top of the U.S. Capitol is a statue of freedom. A friend whose apartment windows look out at the statue has been making a wish this past week for the statue and the idea it stands for. The wish? Hang in there, girl. Let's hope she does. I'm Bruce Morton.
And that's all for this special edition of Late Edition. I'm Wolf Blitzer in Washington. CNN's coverage of America's new war continues. Here's Darren Kagan at the CNN Center in Atlanta.